Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the new season of Tea and Tech. I'm David Chaplin, editor of Computers and Law, and every Friday afternoon for the next 2 months, I'll be joined by a panel of the great and the good, or, well, at least some SCL members, to chat through what's in the news and what's on their minds from tech law and the wider world. The chat panel is open for you to chip in with any comments you might have to help the conversation along, so please do send them in and we'll work those into the conversation as well. You may also have seen in your invites that the session is listed for an hour, but have no fear, we won't subject you to that long on a Friday afternoon. Each broadcast in the series should be about 30 minutes. There's bound to be some overrun, but we're aiming for 30 to 40 minutes each week. This week, I am delighted to be joined by Deane Johns, a consultant lawyer at Keystone Law and chair of the SCL Advisory Board. Alison Berryman, partner and head of technology and commercial law at Waterfront Solicitors, and Lee Gluyas, a partner at CMS Cameron McKenna and a regular contributor to Computers and Law. Before we just get started, I just want to highlight a couple of other online events coming your way in the next couple of weeks. First up is part 2 of Richard Stevens' unmissable tour of IT contracts. That's on Tuesday, the 9th of February. Still time to book for that and to catch up. I think the first session has been recorded if you haven't already done so. And looking further ahead, Professor Chris Marsden is chairing a panel of luminaries to discuss the potential impact of the Digital Services Act. That's on the evening of the 16th of February. Of course, more on those can be found on the SCL website, scl.org, where you can also book online as well. So, with that said, turning today to today's discussion, and given that the whole point of Tea and Tech is to bring us all together while we're holed up at home, our first talking point had to be about working from home. A piece on legal futures this week by a legal recruitment manager actually highlighted what we might be lacking when we're all working at home, and I know this struck a chord with you, Alison, and your circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think we're all getting to the point where it's becoming pretty normal now, isn't it, to be at home all the time. So I think the key thing for us that's been challenging, I think, actually most of the partners at Waterfront always work from home from time to time, and actually most of the staff had that ability to do so as well. But the thing that we've struggled with more than anything is just sort of managing junior staff and trying to make sure that they are properly looked after, actually, particularly with people like trainees, getting the training that they need, and making sure that they have at least some of the experience that we would all have had as trainee lawyers. I think the feeling is that we did a lot of learning by osmosis just by sitting near senior lawyers and joining in with what they were doing, and it's so much more difficult to get that kind of learning experience in this sort of setup. So I mean, it'd be interesting to hear how the others are dealing with that in their workplace, but it's certainly something that we've had to focus on, really trying to engineer those experiences and sort of forcing partners particularly to make sure that they invite trainees along to meet.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to have trainees and younger solicitors on calls, helping arrange calls. And I suppose it could be taking notes and stuff, but I think that's less critical than participating, or at least listening to how situations are calmed down, or even better. I had a boss very early on who said you only learn when things go wrong. So it's also good to see when the partner has inadvertently, shall we say, escalated a situation that perhaps could have been dealt with more calmly.
Yeah.
What do you think, Lee?
I think yes. I think that's exactly right. I think certainly when I was a junior lawyer, I learned a great deal. I think from sitting with a partner or a senior associate and see that person was on the phone and just sort of general demeanour. And as you say, you learn a lot of good things and a lot of bad things from that. Now times have moved on, and I think certainly I haven't dictated the letter or witness statement for a very long time. So that aspect of learning from who you sit with is probably different now. But we do in this present environment, we do have to put more effort into making sure that we do engage with our junior colleagues and and that they do have involvement in what we do. And I think that's just an inevitable consequence of not being in the office environment, and we've got to work hard to make sure that things work in that regard.
Yeah, it's so much about, oh, sorry, Simon.
No, you go ahead.
It's so much about soft skills, isn't it? Because the technical skills you can probably learn by doing, you know, by drafting and by sort of doing a markup of an agreement, and the partner will review it and sort of scribble all over it, or, you know, we'll mark it back up again. But it's the soft skill side of it, the negotiating, like your techniques, as you say, for calming a situation down, or for bringing an end to a difficult conversation, or, you know, just those little things which is so difficult for somebody to tell you how to do. They just have to see how you do it.
I think it's also important to have a follow-up call, and I often do this, you know, where you've had a group discussion involving your client and the other side or whatever, and, you know, I often try to call back, you know, straight after the calls for a little bit of a debrief. How did that go? And that's your chance for some sort of more personal discussion about, gee, you know, I'm pretty wound up about that issue, or, you know, here's why I said this, or, you know, some sort of debrief where a lot of the learning, I think, is done. And indeed feedback on, you know, from the sort of perhaps more independent junior person saying, do you think you made that point well enough? Or perhaps we missed I thought we were going to mention X. Oh.
I think
sorry, I think what's also very important is that we must resist the temptation of not involving people, particularly junior members of our teams, in particular work lines, just because we feel that it's quicker to do it ourselves as we're all working from home, and it's not just a case of wandering around to someone's office or something like that. I think it's important that we do make sure that we allocate work properly. For a number of reasons, but particularly as we're discussing the importance of junior lawyers learning from involvement and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, otherwise it's a false economy, right? Because it might be in a few months' time you'd really rather they were able to pick it up and run with it while you know you're stretched or diverted to something else.
So has any of you come across any technology that actually helps you with this, other than picking up the phone and doing a debrief call? Does the technology actually help on this? I mean, we all say, you know, we don't get everything on Zoom. We get some things on Zoom, but not everything. Is there anything out there that's helped in this regard, or is it you've just got to get on the phone, really?
I think it's that. I mean, we're all pretty techie at Waterfront, and we're normally on our Teams chat, you know, for a quick sort of, are you free now? We're on our, and we do that. I mean, I have a Teams channel with my two trainees who I supervise directly, and if, you know, even if there's a meeting that's coming up in 5 minutes, I'll put it on the Teams channel. You know, are either of you free in 5 minutes time? Do you want to join this call? And, you know, we sort of try to get into the habit of doing that. I mean, I think, you know, it varies amongst the firm about how good people are at remembering, not wanting people to join, but just remembering that they're there and that they ought to ask them. And that's a challenge that we have, you know, just keeping on reminding people, by the way, you really should be bringing trainees in and the more junior staff in as much as possible. But yeah, I think that very kind of instantaneous messaging system, which doesn't involve having to stop what you're doing and make a phone call or whatever, is really useful, I think. But it's, you know, it's fairly basic technology. It's nothing clever.
I think some people have multiple media going at once, so that, you know, you can mute the main discussion with you know, the other side, and have a back discussion, you know, on an alternative medium with your team. And of course, it's very important to get the muting and unmuting correct.
Yeah, similar things, I think, with message facilities on Teams and Zoom and that sort of thing, to make sure that you're not sending the message to everyone.
Oh no, yeah.
Yeah. Which of course legendary even back in the day, you know, the fax that was sent is sent to the wrong fax number, and there were some legendary mistakes.
There are some problems that will carry on forever just using different media. It doesn't matter.
Exactly.
However clever the technology becomes, it can't stop you sending something to the wrong person.
Or reply all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also getting your PowerPoint slides wrong. So, which is what I've been doing. And what I was going to ask though is that the piece was saying in Legal Futures talking about office space and downsizing, and I know, Alison, you know, your firm was thinking, I don't know what you want to say this, but your firm was thinking about, you know, or others might be out there thinking about expanding. What are you going to do? What is going to happen to the office space that people require?
I think we've probably accepted at this point that it's unlikely that we'll ever go back to all working in the office all the time as we did previously, and that, you know, the major mindset change that may need to happen at some point is to persuade lawyers that they don't need to have their own desk in the office, and that, you know, that's quite a big shift, I think. Until we get past that, we will always need a big enough office to accommodate every member of staff. But I think, you know, I think that this extended period of home working has probably done more than anything ever could have done to persuade people that actually you can work a bit more flexibly and potentially, you know, not need, you know, rather than saying, oh, we've outgrown our office and we need to get a bigger one. Actually, we've outgrown our office. Maybe we can just use the space a bit differently from, you know, from what we've done previously. And I think that's very likely to happen to us in the not too distant future.
I haven't had an office since 2011.
You're
anyway,
right. Yeah.
The 10 months I've just spent at my dining table, where I've even had to order an office chair, sick as it may seem. That's the longest period I've ever spent since 2011 at the one
place,
seat and table.
The funny thing that we found, which was very different from what I'd expected, is that it turns out that the thing people really need Waterfront's office for is the photocopier. Like everything else they can live without, but the thing that gets people going into the office is when they need to print large volumes of stuff for a court case or for, you know, some sort of corporate deal, and that's the thing that they can't do at home. You know, they don't really have the time to send it off to a printer and get it sort of done for them. They just want to be there doing it, and they'll go into the office. That's the essential thing is the big printer.
They're lacking a suntan. Those days when you used to have the cover up, you know, you just doing page after page after page.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a surprise to me.
There's a comment from somebody listening in. You don't need a desk in virtual reality. Now there's a thought. Whether we all go to virtual reality and we don't even have to think about going to the office. I think we'll move on from that to something that Lee had spotted earlier this week, which is about environmental concerns and actually about business and insurers now sort of, I suppose, pushing for companies and people and businesses to become net zero. And you've got some thoughts on this, haven't you, Lee?
Yes, this is something that's been on my mind to a degree for a little while, and there was something in the news at the weekend that sort of brought it particularly into focus for this discussion. There's a lot of, as I think as we've all seen, that there's a lot of focus at the moment on businesses showing that they're meeting environmental standards and operating responsibly, and I think there's going to be a growing expectation over the next few years that businesses are going to be capable of showing that they're working towards, for example, net zero carbon emissions and various other environmental standards. And I think that this expectation will be coming into greater focus by possibly legislation, possibly regulation, or possibly driven by the market. And I think businesses will find that their customers and investors will expect them to show that they're working towards net zero carbon emissions and have the other environmental standards. And there was something in the press at the weekend about Aviva suggesting that it's going to cease investing in energy and mining companies that don't meet its requirements in this regard. Now, the mining and energy companies are obvious targets for these sorts of steps, but I think technology companies could also find that there's an expectation on them having good environmental standards. That a lot of them are large users of energy in the production process for the technology equipment they make, and so I think that's something that technology companies can find over the coming months and years, of course.
Yeah, data centers, crypto mining, all of that stuff is very energy intensive.
Absolutely, yeah.
So service
and I
providers.
think also this is perhaps an opportunity for a lot of technology companies, as well as a challenge for them, because companies that manufacture technologies that can assist other businesses in meeting environmental standards could find that there's opportunities for them here. So, for example, technology companies that manufacture technology that can regulate temperature in buildings, so means that they require less heating, less cooling, and less energy that has to go on those sorts of things, and ventilation. There's opportunities for those sort of companies, I would think.
Yeah, monitoring and so on, supply chain management or supply chain monitoring. I mean, it's the same with modern slavery, and just checking that you haven't you're not inadvertently supporting sweatshops or indeed overly energy intensive or wasteful suppliers and so on.
We have certainly started seeing in the tech contract, some of the bigger customers that my clients have, we're certainly starting to see, environmental, policies being passed down and them being required to, often with the clients that I have providing a particular piece of technology to a much larger organization, there's this whole raft of policies that they have to say that they'll comply with, and often one of them is related to environmental stuff, and it's it's interesting to see how much of it my clients can realistically, any small business, tech SME can comply with it, just on the basis that it's drafted for a much larger organization and their staff and their practices. But I'm sure that we're going to see more and more of that.
But I mean, you mentioned printing, for example. If you're a giant law firm with thousands of employees across the planet, and they're all working from home, and I suppose there is a situation where you could give them all printers and they could all print everything they read. We used to call them Gutenbergs back in the day, people who printed off every email.
Yeah.
And then or they could say, you can't, you can't print anything, or and I think that the fact that if you're a service provider or manufacturer with a vast supply chain made up of individual people, even that's 99% of all businesses, right? That's still going to add up across your entire base. So I mean, I get the point, whereas in a little individual you can't meet a big corporate policy, but I suppose you have to have in mind, where you're the SME, that what you do adds up.
Yeah.
And so, in your own firms, is it something your own firms are looking at, trying to? Well, obviously, we've got to try and go net zero emissions and all those sorts of goals we've got. What's happening in your own firms to do that, to achieve that?
It's a good point. He hurriedly looked at Keystone's aim announcements.
We've just got a comment in, somebody saying both my employer and my husband's employer have no print policies and have paid for other working from home equipment, going back to the work from home here, but not printers. So no print policies. Yeah. Is that something that any of you are going through?
I mean, that's typically been the way at Waterfront anyway. I mean, we tend to be more on the technologically minded side of the legal practitioners, and that's tended to be the way we've worked. I mean, we absolutely don't have a policy that people are not allowed to print, but I think we just don't typically print a lot of stuff unless it is, like I said, can't really get away with it in a court matter where you're being asked to send 4 copies or whatever it is of the bundles and that sort of thing. But we typically don't print a huge amount of stuff, but but and that kind of thing. But I think all of the partners, or certainly two of us, are particularly keen on sort of environmental friendliness in one form or another. I mean, there are only 20 of us in total, so it's a relatively small impact that any changes we make will have, but nonetheless, it's something that's quite important to us as a firm to try and make the changes that we can make in order to help the environment in, you know, whatever small ways we can do it.
I think it's also expected by our clients as well. Not so much the printing, but you know, often in pictures, for example, we're asked about our environmental credentials, and that's becoming quite commonplace.
Yeah, I mean, we're so dispersed. You know, there are 500 sort of senior lawyers spread all over the country and indeed the planet. And you know, a lot of these sort of day-to-day administrative decisions are necessarily devolved in that situation. So, you know, it's how you're set up in your home environment, or if you've chosen to have an office somewhere. But as a frequenter of sundry cafes, gyms, the law society, reading room, wherever, you know, I've tended to travel pretty light, I must say.
I think as a disputes lawyer, when I was thinking of this theme, I inevitably look at the scope for disputes here. I do wonder whether, as we said, it's an opportunity for many technology companies if they produce technologies that can assist other businesses in meeting environmental standards. But you wonder whether where there's an opportunity, there's also a risk. And could we find in future that if a business, for example, professes that it will meet certain environmental standards, net zero carbon emissions, for example, and relies on certain technologies to help it achieve that, whether that's, for example, if it's a logistics company, it relies on technologies for energy efficiency of its fleet, or the example of heating and ventilation that we spoke about earlier. I just wonder whether technology companies could find themselves in the firing line for claims if those businesses do suffer losses through not meeting their environmental standards, whether that's reputational damage and loss of business, or loss of investment, which could affect their market capitalization, or, you know, a lot of these things seem to be slightly remote, but you just never know where disputes can come from.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, with a lot of those things, they will have probably fairly well sort of formed SLAs of one sort or another, or at least hopefully they will, which sort of give some level of assurance, if not a guarantee, and hopefully if their contracts lawyer's done a good job, hopefully you know, like a specific service credit arrangement that either, you know, that protects both parties in a way, so they know what the maximum and minimum is that they can claim for those kinds of losses. I mean, you know, there's always
but I mean, if you're shut down for breaching modern slavery you know, regulation, and you fail to supply garments to order or whatever, I mean, you know, surely you're not going to be able to hide behind a force majeure type provision. You know, you're going to be in breach of your commitments to meet the volume and so on and so forth, aren't you? So, you know, it's worth everyone bearing in mind that there'll be more attention focused on these sorts of issues.
Well, also, is one of the issues the supply chain of the materials used and the resources used in creating technologies. I mean, that's another supply chain. Rare metals and so on. Rare metals in particular, isn't it? Is that is there any? I mean, presume not getting any client pressure on that at the moment, but that will come, I presume.
It's one of these strange things, isn't it, with almost everything you see. You know, the humans create a problem and then they fix a problem, but that creates a different problem, and then they fix that, and then they do, and it's always, you know, it's an ongoing sort of balance of how big the problem is. You know, everything that you solve has some impact elsewhere, and it's not all going to be positive. And I think it's normally at some point down the line that we realize what this sort of secondary or tertiary or whatever it is issue is that arises.
Yeah, what externalities have been pushed onto others as a result of, you know, a particular activity. And, you know, social media, the tech giants are a classic case of, you know, shifting, I suppose, or not taking responsibility for certain externalities that now society is having to grapple with. And question is, should they be made to kind of clean up the mess, in terms of fake news and so on. So yeah, I mean, it's you're seeing it, as you say, across all sorts of issues.
Yeah. I was reading something not that long ago about sort of the amount of space junk that there is because of satellites and the obviously things that we now rely on for all kinds of things. And like who I mean, to me, that was just sort of, I'd heard about it previously, but who would have thought like 20 years ago that space would be getting cluttered up with our rubbish? It's sort of, it's almost unbelievable, isn't it? That we managed to sort of, but it's, that was solving a different, that's solving a different problem. And it's, and those, the ability to communicate via satellites is amazing. It's clearly something that we rely on quite heavily. So
GPS and so on,
exactly.
So Lee, have you got anything more to add now, or should we move on to our next talking point?
Let's move on.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay, right. This is something Simon picked up on, and it's something we're talking about the SCL advisory board, and this is just an example about litigants in person, small medium enterprises being able to sort of litigate, isn't it? And how they get and whether there should be group litigation in our court. Are our courts able to handle when they notice that there's a lot of claims coming through arising out of maybe Google's algorithm is not putting their adverts high enough or something like that.
I mean, it's something that struck me in the course of as a consumer finance lawyer. Of course, I've been privy to things like PPI claims and so on, and we've all seen these big data breaches. And in a lot of these cases, there is an obvious place to complain in order to avoid court proceedings. But recently, I've been involved in a situation where a finance company has been suing lots of different people across the country in county courts, and the courts really hadn't spotted, or didn't seem to have spotted, that there were these very similar claims being made. And on the face of it, the claim looked quite straightforward. Being litigants in person, the amounts weren't huge. And being litigants in person generally, even where there's a small company involved, people have found the factual situation too complex to devise their own defence. And a small group came to me for an analysis as to whether there was a defence and so on, and I was able to put them on the right track. And then, great people gradually began sharing their defences that had been drafted by counsel on a redacted basis, and they became more organised. And it was interesting that suddenly the court started to detect that, hang on, there seem to be a few of these claims, and kind of put it on the claimant to inform the court how many claims there were. And it just seemed to me that the courts didn't necessarily, therefore, perhaps have the tools to spot where there's a mass of small claims which were placing litigants in person at a particular disadvantage, and maybe they should be looking for that, and then working with other alternative dispute resolution bodies like Financial Ombudsman Service or other ombudsman services to sort of work to resolve the claims in a more cost efficient fashion. And it also struck me that there'll be possibly more and more of these types of claims as algorithms become more prevalent in dealing with things like, calculating insurance premiums, or whether indeed you should get insurance, or positioning your business's ads in search results and so on. And it's obvious where it's say personal data or some types of financial service where to go. But if it's a complex claim and you're a small company, for example, how are we going to manage the potential for you to be the victim of quite a complex, a complex problem where you don't have a ready means of redress?
What do you think? I mean, we haven't got any answers at the moment. What sorts of things could we do you think, Simon, to get the courts to be aware that stats at the courts, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's we've had early discussions with the Courts and Tribunal Service, for example, or the people responsible for that in the Ministry of Justice, and that they were quick to point out that there is it's a judicial issue as to how cases should be managed and resolved. And it's down to the courts and tribunal service, for example, as a tech service provider, to just arm the judiciary with whatever search functionality or filtering they need in order to be able to spot patterns in the claims that perhaps inform them that there are, mass claims to be dealt with together. But it's possibly wider than that, and not necessarily related only to the courts, particularly, where you've got these algorithms that may be causing kind of harm in certain postcodes or according to certain customer attributes. People who don't get insurance in flood plains, for example, and then what society does to sort of deal with that, I suppose, externality. The algorithm is generating externalities that have to be dealt with somewhere, and the case is how do we detect those? And I guess that feels like a technology problem to solve, or a data problem to solve with technology. But of course, one can be guilty of solutionizing or leaping to conclusions about what the problem really is, and therefore what the solution should be.
Yeah,
or indeed whether it's possible to work out. Sorry, David.
Go on, Lee.
I was going to say whether it's possible to work out what the problem is. The example you give, for example, about somebody not getting insurance because they're on a floodplain. Now, if that decision is made by some sort of AI or algorithm, it may not be easy, even if that individual has a route to try to find out why the decision was made. It may not be that easy for the insurance company to work out why the algorithm made that decision.
Yeah, and even if you have the right, to have a human involved in what was an automated decision, you've got to know that you have that right. And okay, we're all told that from a personal data standpoint, but it may not be a personal data or perceived as a personal data issue in the first place by the victim of it.
Yeah.
Well, it slightly reminds me of the. I was hosting another webinar on a completely different subject with a journalist who covered the post office Horizon.
Oh yes.
From the start, and the fact that the sub postmasters actually found out that each and every one of them was, not every one of them, but there were several hundred of them who were suffering from this problem, was luck more than anything else. People just connecting and seeing news stories in individual newspapers. So and what's interesting is that we just had a message in from somebody in the audience today saying, in the tribunal service, the astute judiciary have been given delegated powers to trusted registrars to begin to address systemic problem claims. So that's okay. It sounds like there's movement out there in the tribunals, but not in the tribunal service. But the post office Horizon, it was just luck that people found out, and it's only when they got together that they had the confidence to really take the litigation further.
Yes, I followed that in private eye, and it was just stunning the extent to which the post office continued to deny that there was a problem, even where people were going to jail.
Yeah,
it was just really quite stunning. So that even where you have the means to detect that there's a problem and people catch on, and it turns out to be quite widespread, you have this kind of institutional resistance and denial in operation, so that nobody wants to take ownership of the problem, and people have to expend quite considerable personal resources before anyone will really pay attention to them. You're seeing it a bit in the you saw it a bit early on in the PPI scenario, or the HBOS claims and RBS and GLG type claims, where businesses were saying they'd been victimized. And again, there was no, even once they found commonality, there seemed to be no kind of way of gathering themselves efficiently together to have their claims resolved. And, we end up with these kind of media-driven scandals.
Yeah, I mean, because that's what the post office one turned into, isn't it? Really? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, anything to add on there, Alison and Lee?
Not from me. I mean, I think the whole question of AI and liability is probably a topic for another day, and a pretty big one.
Oh,
But
it's another one that's going to run and run. I think, like in the environment, it's another
I'm
one.
not gonna. Yeah, I won't start that at 3:36 when we said we'd finish around 3:30.
With the tea cooling.
Yeah, another time. Okay, at that point then, I think we'll draw close to today's discussions, and just obviously say many thanks to the panelists for joining in today. If you fancy showing your appreciation of their efforts, please go to buymeacoffee.com/SCL. Any money raised through that channel is funneled back to our student initiative, so it helps to get our students involved and our trainees involved. So with that, I'd just like to say, yeah, look forward to seeing you all this time next week, same place, of course, we're all there. And thanks again to the panelists, and goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Bye,
That was
everyone.
fun. Thanks. Have a
Bye.
great weekend.